Hey everybody, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be talking about thinking by numbers, a data-driven decision making, all that good stuff.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and this is something that's been on my mind a lot lately.
Yeah.
I feel like every day there's a new article or a new book about how data is changing the world.
Yeah.
And I've been really curious to kind of dig deeper and see, what what's the hype all about? What are the real implications of this trend? And I know you sent over some excerpts from this book by Ian Ayres called Super Crunchers,
Right.
which seems to be kind of a seminal work on this topic. So I'm excited to dive into that with you and see what we can uncover.
Yeah, and Super Crunchers it's a great overview of this whole trend, and I think it's really relevant to what we're seeing today.
Yeah, I mean, he wrote this book back in 2009, which is crazy to think about because so much has changed even since then. But yeah, but it seems like he was really ahead of the curve in terms of identifying, this trend toward data-driven decision making.
Yeah, he was definitely ahead of the curve, and really, the book is all about this rise of super crunching,
Mm.
which is what he calls using massive amounts of data and algorithms to make predictions and decisions.
Yeah, and he argues that this is, the new way to be smart. Like the subtitle of the book is Why Thinking by Numbers is the New Way to Be Smart.
Right, and it's really changing everything from how companies target us with ads to how doctors diagnose patients to even things like how teachers evaluate students.
Wow, yeah, it's like every aspect of our lives is being touched by this trend.
Exactly.
So I guess let's just jump right in. What are some of the key takeaways from Super Crunchers? Like what did you find most interesting or surprising?
Well, I think one of the things that really struck me was how widespread this data-driven approach has become. Ayres argues that we're in the midst of a major shift, moving away from solely relying on intuition and experience towards using, this data and algorithms to predict outcomes.
Yeah, and he gives some really compelling examples like how companies like Amazon and Capital One were early adopters of this
Right.
approach.
Amazon, with their recommendation algorithms, like customers who bought this also bought. And Capital One using data to figure out which credit card offers would be most appealing to which customers.
Yeah, I remember when that first started happening with Amazon, I was like, how did they know?
It was kind of creepy.
Yeah, it was kind of creepy, but also kind of cool. Like, whoa, this is pretty smart.
Yeah, and it was incredibly effective for these companies. Like
Mm.
Ayres talks about how Capital One was able to, really increase their profits by using data to target their marketing.
But I guess the flip side of that is that it can also be kind of invasive, right? Like,
Right.
how much data are they collecting on us and what are they doing with it?
That's right. And Ayres does address those concerns in the book. He talks about the potential for bias in algorithms
Hmm.
and the importance of protecting privacy.
And, one of the things that I was thinking about as I was reading the excerpts is there a point where this data-driven approach goes too far?
Right.
Like, is there a point where we're relying too much on data and not enough on our own intuition and judgment?
It's a great question, and it's one that Ayres grapples with throughout the book. He uses this really interesting example, the research on concealed handgun laws by John Lott.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Lott was a strong advocate for gun rights, and his initial analysis of crime data suggested that states allowing concealed weapons actually saw a decrease in crime rates.
Interesting.
And this research actually had a big impact on legislation at the time.
Yeah, it seemed like a pretty clear-cut case, like the data was saying this,
Right.
so let's go with it. But then,
But then what happened was that Ayres and another researcher, John Donahue, they discovered that there were actually some significant errors in Lott's data analysis.
oh no.
There was a coding error that had basically skewed the results.
Oh,
And
wow.
once they corrected for that error, the data actually didn't support Lott's original conclusions.
So it was like the opposite of what he was saying.
Right. It really undermined his whole argument.
So it just goes to show you that just because someone's using data doesn't automatically make them right.
Yeah.
Like you have to be critical of the data. You have to, look at the methodology and make sure that it's actually sound.
And that's where Ayres argues for the importance of having what he calls an empirical devil's advocate,
Okay.
someone whose job is to scrutinize the data and the methodology to ensure that the research is as accurate and unbiased as possible.
So basically like a fact checker for data.
Exactly. It's like having a fact checker specifically for data analysis.
Yeah.
And, in this case with the gun control research, if there had been an empirical devil's advocate involved from the beginning, they might have caught that coding error earlier
Yeah.
and prevented, that faulty research from having such a big impact.
Yeah, it's kind of scary to think about how much influence data can have,
It is.
especially when it's presented as, objective and scientific.
Right, and that's why it's so important to be critical of the data and to understand, where it came from, how it was collected and analyzed, and, what the potential biases might be.
So it sounds like data can be a powerful tool,
Yeah.
but it's not a foolproof solution.
Right.
And we need to be careful about blindly accepting data-driven conclusions without a healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely. And it also raises the question of, how this data-driven decision-making fits with traditional expertise.
Right, like are we going to see a world where doctors and teachers and even movie producers are replaced by algorithms?
Are we all going to be obsolete?
Yeah, like I'm imagining that scene from Desk Set where Katharine Hepburn is battling the giant computer that's trying to take her job.
According to Ayres, it's not that simple. He argues that algorithms and human intuition can actually complement each other.
Okay.
Algorithms are really good at identifying patterns in data.
Yeah.
But human intuition is essential for determining, which questions to ask and how to interpret the data in a meaningful way.
So it's not about replacing human judgment. It's about using data to enhance it.
Yes.
I like that perspective.
Yeah, and Ayres tells this fascinating story about Justin Wolfers, an economist who used his knowledge of sports betting and data analysis to uncover evidence of point shaving in college basketball.
Oh, wow.
So he had this hunch, based on his experience, and then he used data to investigate. And he actually found a pattern that supported his suspicion.
So the data was used to confirm his intuition.
Right, and it led to, this new discovery about what was happening in college basketball.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and think about how data is being used in medicine today.
Yeah.
Physicians are increasingly using data-driven guidelines to help them make diagnoses and treatment plans, but they still rely on their, clinical judgment and experience to tailor those plans to each individual patient.
So it's really about finding that balance between data and intuition.
Exactly.
And using both to make the best decisions possible.
Right.
But in order to do that effectively, don't we need to be able to understand the language of data?
Yeah.
I mean, most of us aren't statisticians, we don't necessarily speak the language of standard deviations and algorithms and all that.
That's a great point. And Ayres really emphasizes the importance of what he calls data literacy. He highlights two key concepts that he believes can empower anyone to be, more informed consumers of data standard deviation and Bayes' theorem.
Oh, boy.
Now, don't worry.
I'm already getting a headache just hearing those words.
I know they sound intimidating,
Yeah.
but they're actually more intuitive than you might think, and we can definitely break them down in a way that makes sense.
Okay. All right. I'm willing to give it a shot. If it means I can navigate this data-driven world a little bit better.
I think you'll be surprised by how much these concepts can actually empower you.
All right. Well, let's dive into those in our next segment then.
Sounds good to me.
All right. So standard deviation and Bayes' theorem. Hit me.
Okay. So let's start with standard deviation.
Okay.
In the simplest terms, it's basically a way of measuring how spread out data points are from the average.
So like if the standard deviation is high, that means the data is more variable, more unpredictable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And low standard deviation means that the data points are, clustered closer to the average, suggesting more stability.
So it's like a measure of consistency?
Yeah, pretty much. And Ayres gives us this great example about pregnancy.
Huh.
Most people know that a pregnancy lasts about 9 months.
Right.
But there's actually a standard deviation of 15 days around that average due date.
So some babies come early, some babies come late.
Exactly. And that's totally normal because of that standard deviation.
That makes sense. I know plenty of people who've had babies either earlier or later than their quote unquote due date.
Right. And so understanding standard deviation in that context can help, manage expectations and reduce stress.
Yeah, it's like it gives you a range of
Yeah.
what's considered normal.
It helps us understand that there's a range of normal variation, and we shouldn't necessarily, freak out if things fall outside of that exact average.
It's like a margin of error.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so that's standard deviation. What about Bayes' theorem? That one sounds even more intimidating.
I know it sounds scary, but it's really a pretty simple concept at its core. It's essentially a way to update our beliefs as we get new information.
Okay.
It's about incorporating new evidence to refine our understanding of a situation.
So how does that work in practice?
Well, think about spam filters.
Okay.
They use a Bayesian approach to determine whether an email is spam or not. So the filter starts with a prior belief, based on known spam characteristics.
Like what words are commonly used in spam emails?
Exactly. And then as it analyzes each new email, it updates its belief based on the content, the sender information. And this allows the filter to become more accurate over time as it gathers more data.
So it's like the spam filter is learning.
It's learning, yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
And this Bayesian approach can be applied in a lot of different areas. Like Ayres talks about how doctors use Bayes' theorem when making diagnoses.
Oh, wow.
So they might start with an initial assessment, based on a patient's symptoms, their medical history,
Right.
and then they use test results to update their diagnosis and determine the best course of treatment.
So it's like they're constantly refining their understanding based on new information.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's see how this is all fitting together.
And Bayes' theorem provides this framework for combining our existing knowledge with new evidence to refine our understanding and make better decisions.
So it's not just about the data, it's about how we use the data. Exactly.
It's about how we interpret it, how we update our beliefs based on what the data is telling us.
It's like data is a tool,
Right.
but it's up to us to use it wisely.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've talked about standard deviation, we've talked about Bayes' theorem. How do these concepts actually help us, in our everyday lives?
Well, I think the key takeaway here is that these concepts can help us become more critical and informed thinkers.
Okay.
Regardless of our, mathematical abilities, they provide tools for understanding uncertainty and making sense of data in a way that feels more intuitive.
So it's not about memorizing formulas, it's about cultivating a mindset of curiosity,
Yeah,
asking questions, looking beyond the surface level of data.
exactly.
Okay, so how do we put these concepts into practice?
We'll start by just being more aware of the role that data plays in your own decisions.
Okay.
When you see a statistic in the news, don't just accept it blindly.
Right.
Ask yourself, where did this data come from?
Mm.
How is it collected and analyzed?
Uh-huh.
Are there any potential biases that might have influenced the results?
So like be a critical consumer of data.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to challenge assumptions or ask for clarification.
Yeah.
If a financial advisor presents you with a data-driven investment recommendation, ask them to walk you through the logic. Explain the data behind it.
Yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Exactly.
It sounds like being data literate is an ongoing process.
It is.
It's not a destination. It's about developing a curious and skeptical mindset.
Yeah.
Being willing to ask questions and recognizing that data can be a powerful tool, but it's not a magic bullet.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we're becoming more data literate, we're asking questions, we're being critical, but what about the potential downsides of this data-driven revolution?
Right.
I mean, we hear a lot about concerns over privacy, the potential for algorithms to be biased. How do we reconcile those concerns with the, potential benefits of super crunching?
That's a really important question and one that we definitely need to be talking about.
Yeah. It's a tough one. It feels like we're walking this tightrope between the potential benefits of data and the potential risks.
Right. Yeah, it's a balancing act for sure.
On the one hand, data has this power to solve problems, to make things better, but then on the other hand, there's always the possibility of it being misused or, leading to unintended consequences. It's a lot to consider.
Yeah, and Ayres definitely acknowledges those concerns.
Yeah.
He doesn't shy away from the potential downsides of super crunching,
Okay, good.
but he ultimately argues that, when it's done thoughtfully and ethically,
Right.
it can be a force for good.
So how do we make sure that it's used for good? Like, does he offer any solutions?
He does. One of his main points is that we need to become more data literate as a society.
Yeah, we were talking about that.
The more we understand about data, how it's collected, analyzed, interpreted,
Right.
the better equipped we'll be to identify potential problems and advocate for responsible use.
It's like that old saying, knowledge is power.
Exactly.
If we can understand the language of data, then we can be more critical consumers of it.
Right.
We won't just blindly accept whatever is presented to us. We'll be able to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
Challenge conclusions that don't seem right,
Absolutely. And it's not just about being critical. It's also about recognizing the potential of data to do good.
Right.
Ayres highlights some incredible examples of how data analysis is being used to improve healthcare, to personalize education, to even combat poverty.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned that because it made me think about that movie Desk Set again.
Oh, yeah.
Where Katharine Hepburn's character is so worried about being replaced by a computer. But then by the end of the film, she realizes that the computer can actually make her job easier.
Right.
And it allows her to focus on the more, human aspects of her work.
I love that analogy.
It's a good one, right?
Because it really speaks to this idea that it's not about humans versus machines.
Yeah,
It's
right.
about humans and machines working together,
Yeah.
using the strengths of each
Collaboration.
exactly to create better outcomes.
So maybe instead of it's to harness its power for good.
I think so. I think that's the best way to approach it.
Yeah.
With a balance of optimism and caution, recognizing both the potential and the pitfalls.
Hmm.
And as we move further into this data-driven age, I think these conversations are more important than ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been a really fascinating conversation.
It has.
I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this really complex topic,
We have.
but you've given us a lot to think about.
Good. I'm glad.
So thank you so much for guiding us through this world of super crunching.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, we want to leave you with this question. What are your thoughts on the rise of data-driven decision making? Are you excited about its potential? Are you wary of the downsides? Let us know what you think.
Yeah, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and remember that data is a powerful tool, but ultimately it's up to us to decide how we use it.
That's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into super crunchers.
Thanks for having me.